Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I am Rick Bennett. January 29th, 1863, hundreds of Shoshone men, women, and children perished at the hands of the U.S. Army at the Bear River site in southern Idaho. We're going to visit that site with historian and author Darren Parry. He's the author of the Bear River Massacre, and we're going to talk about the tales of the horrible tragedy there. We're also going to talk about the new center that's going to be opening up there, and Darren is still fundraising for that. They're trying to get over $5 million. If you'd like to donate to help fund this center, you can do so either by going to the website boaogoi.org, boaogoi.org, and you can submit your donation there. Also, you can send a check to the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, 707 North Main Street, Brigham City, Utah, 84302. So I think it's going to be a fantastic thing. They've actually, if you go to the website, and we'll include it here in our video, the architectural rendering of what the site will look like. But we're going to visit that site here today and see what it actually looks like, where hundreds of Shoshone members of the tribe perished at the hands of the U.S. Army. It's a sad story, but I think you'll find this video really riveting, so check out our conversation. Tell us about this place.
Where we're standing today is where the interpretive center building is going to be.
Okay.
Just behind us will be the building. Just off to my left here, this kind of gully will be a amphitheater built into the side of that hill. So, and why here? Why here? Because just straight out in front of us is the killing field. That's where all the bodies lie, still today. None of the bodies were buried in 1863. The ground was frozen solid. The bodies were left there to rot, and so, yeah.
Because it was below zero that day, so they probably would have just frozen.
Yeah, and you couldn't dig a grave. Some of the pioneers said they tried to throw a few of the bodies into the Bear River, which is right there. And later on in the day, it was flowing again. It wasn't frozen, but they said that was too much of a big task because of the number of bodies that were there. But just straight down here in this big open field is where the lodges were. Almost all of the killing took place. So here on the Bear River that you can see down here, you can actually see a little steam coming up, but it's warm enough now that you can't see it very good. But right on that bend of that river, you can see where there's a cutout into the side hill.
Okay.
The hot springs come out of that and flow down into the river. So that little tiny ravine right there at the apex of that circle is where the hot springs are located.
Oh.
That whole geographical area. So the lodges were around it and everywhere close to it. They camped here because of the hills to the north. It protected them from the north winds in the wintertime. And then there were plenty of willows down there. The Russian olive was taken over today, but there would have been plenty of willows. And the Shoshone used for baskets and winnowing pans and water jugs and all types of things. But that's the initial assault. The troops came across the river and attacked the Shoshone straight on, and that's where almost all the soldiers died. They pulled back, and then half the group went where the white home is there, up around that way. The other half came around this way, and then they got behind them and they pushed the Shoshone down to the river.
Okay.
And pinched them on the river, so they could either jump into the river to try to escape or turn and fight. And so almost all of the bodies, the 400 bodies, would have been down in that area. We had an amateur archaeologist a few years ago. Before we owned it, we would have never let him dig on it. But before he owned it, he came up here and got permission from the landowner with metallurgy equipment, just really crude way of doing things, but he identified a few sites and dug up and found cartridges from the soldiers. And one he dug down about a foot one time and he found a bullet with human remains, bones. And so he called me at that point, and I came up and just took one look and realized what it was. And so we just buried it. He GPS marked it. So we have all of the metal hits. I just asked him as a personal favor. We don't own the land yet, but would you not do any more digging on that sacred site? So
you don't plan to look for
no. We know exactly where it happened. My grandmother would bring us here as little children and say, the lodges were out in this field here, and all the killing took place down there close to the river. Mm-hmm. So we knew exactly where it was. Utah State's Archaeology Department a few years ago got a grant to do some digging over by the road.
Okay.
They thought that's where the site would be, and I just kind of laughed under my own breath because I knew, and they never did ask me where the site was, but it was pretty specific to the grant and the money they got. They needed to look there, and they didn't find anything there. And I'm going, well, duh, I could have told you that. We know where it took place, and no, we don't want you digging there either, because if you think about it, more than 400 bodies are there. It's a sacred site to us. Mm-hmm. And that's why up here, nothing took place up here. That's why a beautiful building here telling the story of our people, and to have an outdoor space, an amphitheater, where we can host events and other things, just really a big deal to us. And I'm right in the middle of raising money to build that interpretive center. Raised over $2 million the first year. COVID-19 hasn't been very friendly with fundraising lately, but I see people more willing to donate now, and so I've seen a lot more activity in the last month, and I'm still raising money to build this building. That's my full-time job with the tribe, is to raise enough money that we can build this building to honor our people. And so anybody that I bring here and show, and they can hear the story, and not only hear the story, but feel. Mm-hmm. I think there's a feeling here when you're here. You know, something terrible took place here. And so my grandmother would tell me, if you're here at just the right time in the evening, you can hear the cries of the little ones crying for their mothers. And so that, and just knowing that we can honor them, their voices scream to me from the dust, and the journey I'm on to tell their story, really doors have been opened that really, frankly, I don't know how and why, but I've met people that have been really friendly to the cause. And like I was saying before, people that come here really want to be a part of it and donate to it. And I'm happy to say the LDS Church was a donor to our project. I won't say how much, but they were our first donor to the site, and they really want to see it happen too. And so the state of Utah actually appropriated $750,000 last year to the site.
So this is funny to me because we are in Idaho.
Exactly. Yeah. I've had somebody tell me, you're the greatest salesman in the world. You can get the state of Utah to give you $750,000 for a building in Idaho. And the fact that Idaho hasn't given us anything yet.
Oh, wow.
So, and I'm trying. The state of Idaho just seems to be a little more stubborn about it. I still think they consider this area not part of Idaho. So,
Are you still looking for donations then?
Oh yes, absolutely.
How much is the center going to cost? And how much do you need?
It has a $5 million price tag.
Okay.
And then I've raised about half of it. So I'm still looking to raise another $2.5 million. And I actually raised the first $2.5 million within a year.
Oh wow.
So it's not like it can't be done. It can be done. And I thought I'd have it by now, but COVID really changed the way people looked at giving money and everything. So yeah, those that want to donate to it can still donate to it.
Now, are those?
I can provide you a link.
Are those your cows? Or?
No, we lease the land to some ranchers in the area
Yeah, there's a rancher down there now.
that actually live just right over here. They're good guys. All they do is raise their cows. They repair the fences. They take care of them. And the cattle actually keep the weeds and the grasses eaten down.
Oh, good.
So, but when we build the interpretive center, the cattle will disappear.
Yeah.
We'll stop. But they're good guys, a good family to have as a partner.
Mm-hmm. So, how long will it take to build the center after?
Once we have the funding in place, it'll take about 16 months.
16 months?
Yeah, and Wadman Construction out of Ogden has been selected as a contractor.
Oh, wow, you've already got that.
Oh, yeah, we've actually got plans. We hired an architect firm. They did a lot of the pre-design work for me pro bono.
Oh, nice.
And so they're named GSBS out of Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been very, very good to us. And so we've got plans. We're just waiting for me to raise the money. And
so you said your grandma knew right where the killing happened.
and you know why?
What?
So May Timbambu would bring me up here as a child, and for years later, he's an adult, and we just sit and look, and she'd say, that's where the lodges were, because her grandfather would bring her here.
Uh-huh.
And her grandfather was 12 years old during the massacre and was in it, and he was a survivor. He survived by playing dead, laying among the dead for 3 hours. And so his name was Dabuzi. After he joined the church at the age 21, he took on the name of Jaeger.
Mm-hmm.
His name's Jaeger Timbambu. That was my grandmother's May's grandfather. So he said, this is where our lodges were, this is what happened, and this is where the soldiers came. And then they flanked us and came around from behind and pushed us to the river, which really ended it. And they were out of ammunition anyway. The cool thing with Jaeger,
the tribe was.
Yeah. The cool thing about Jaeger, so he was the first, he survived as a 12-year-old. He was the first one to be baptized into the church. Sagwich and other tribal members were having dreams. And Sagwich said one night he had a dream that 3 men appeared to him in his dream and told him of a God among the Mormon people, and that he needed to quit his roaming ways and send for missionaries that would teach them how to live and what to do. And so the next day he went to Ogden and found a missionary. His name was George Washington Hill. George Washington Hill had been called by Brigham Young in 1855 to go teach the Shoshones in central Idaho. And they actually ended up calling them the Lemhi Shoshones. Sacagawea's people, or Lemhi Shoshones. And so up by the Salmon River.
So in case any non-members don't know who Lemhi is, can you tell us that?
Well, yeah, Lemhi was a character out of the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
So if you're not a member of the LDS Church, you'd have no idea when they say Lemhi Shoshones, that would mean nothing to you.
Right.
To the LDS faithful, it's like, yeah. Well, so they named him after a Book of Mormon person.
Right.
And so, yeah. So George Hill had learned the language in 1855. He was very successful in proselyting those Shoshones. His journals say he baptized more than 400 in 1855. The mission ended in 1857 because 2 of the other missionaries that went with George were killed by the Indians. And so Brigham Young pulled him out. He ended up being in Ogden and just was a rancher, and he worked for the Union Pacific Railroad in Ogden. And then Sagwich has this dream, but he knows of George Washington Hill because he was one of the few men in Ogden that could speak the language fluently. And so Sagwich went to his house after his dream and said, you need to come teach us. And George Hill told him, I'm no longer a missionary. I can't do it. There's order in the Lord's church. And that's a quote from his journals saying, I can't do it, but you can send somebody to Salt Lake and find the missionaries. So Jaeger gets sent by his dad, Sagwich, to Salt Lake to find the missionaries. They say the only missionaries that can speak your language are out with the go shoots out in the Tooele Valley area. He doesn't come back home to tell Sagwitch, his dad, that. He actually goes out and finds them in Tooele. And then was baptized out in the Tooele Valley. And then the missionaries said, as soon as we're done here, we'll come your way. Well, he returns home, tells Sagwitch that he's now a member of the church. He was baptized. and then the next day, George Washington Hill gets a letter from Brigham Young, a telegraph, saying, come to Salt Lake. And when he walks in, and this is all from George Washington Hill's journals, so I've read them all. And his journal says, Brigham Young summoned me to Salt Lake. I walked in his office and he said, George, I've had a heavy burden on my shoulders, and that heavy burden is now going to be yours. And he then said, I want to call you to go preach the gospel to the Shoshones in the North Country. Well, the North Country was Corinne and Brigham City. So George went
Which is
home.
a lot farther south than where we are right now.
Absolutely.
What's it? Probably an hour away from here by car.
It is. Yeah. So George goes home. I can imagine he has 6 children, a wife, a farm, a night job at the Union Pacific. And he tells them, I've got to quit my job and go teach the Shoshones. And I'm sure, that's a conversation at that dinner table. I would love to be a fly on the wall with his wife, who'd put up with a lot already. Mm-hmm. And when he gets back home that day, Sagwitch is sitting on his porch. And he said, we really need you to come teach us the gospel. And George said, well, my leader called me down and talked to me, and I'm supposed to go teach you guys the gospel. So he said, I will come, Sagwitch, but I can't come tomorrow. I can't come next week. It might be 2 or 3 months down the road, but I will come. So he leaves. Sagwitch leaves satisfied, returns home. That night, George goes to work at the Union Pacific, and his only job was to guard the train that would come from Evanston, Wyoming. So he's down there waiting for the train, and then he gets word that the train had derailed in the Weaver Canyon.
Oh.
He had no work, and so instead of going home, which most of us would have gone home, he jumps on a freight train that takes him to Corinne. And then he said he got there, it wasn't light yet. And when the sun started coming up, he asked some of the locals where the Shoshones were camped, about 10 miles north in the Bear River City area, along the Bear River. And so he heads out on foot to find these Shoshones. Nobody knew he was coming. In his journal, he said he was about 5 miles down the road, and a young Shoshone boy was riding his horse fast, stopped and said, I'm heading to town to get meat for the feast. And George didn't think anything of it and kept walking, and a few miles further, he was almost to the campsite. He looked out in the distance and he saw a man on a horse, leading a horse, and it was Sagwitch leading a horse. He came down and had this conversation with George. He said, I'm here to pick you up. And George said in his journal, he said, I told you I was not coming for some time. And Sagwitch said, I had a dream last night and the Great Spirit told me you were coming today. And our camp's ready. We put on our best clothes, cleaned up the campsite. And I sent somebody to get meat for the feast. So, long story short, George said, after the greatest meal I've ever had, I commenced to teaching them the gospel of Jesus Christ. And later that afternoon, I baptized 102 Shoshones in the Bear River. And I'm thinking, so Sagwitch gets baptized in the Bear River, the same Bear River where 10 years earlier he'd watched almost the entire destruction of his people. And I can imagine the thoughts that he must have had. I don't know. My grandmother would have never joined the church. She was always angry at the church for what happened. She blamed them. But Sagwitch had a different heart. I don't know. He was born at the right time to navigate some difficult waters. And so I often think that I'm wired more like him. I'm much more forgiving than my grandmother ever would have been. But I think he was needed for that time. And so from there, thousands have joined the church, Shoshones. Actually, the next year, the Shoshones in the whole general area had heard how good the church was to our people, teaching us to farm and grow crops. That Washakie, Chief Washakie at Wind River, brought all of his people down in the spring, the next spring, and all of them were baptized.
This is Wind River, Wyoming.
Wind River, Wyoming.
Right.
So Chief Washakie, a famous Shoshone chief, and his people were baptized the next spring in the same Bear River. And in fact, we have the Eastern Band, Washakie's people said, Washakie was actually baptized about 3 different times throughout his life. But he died a Lutheran.
Oh,
The
really?
Lutherans built a church out on the res, out the Wind River. And he ended up, before his dying days, joining the Lutherans.
Oh, that's funny.
So, but he's Mormon again now. So I laugh about that. But so what a legacy Sagwitch left. And I'm a 6th generation Shoshone Mormon, or Shoshone Latter-day Saint, I should say, but not get in trouble.
Yeah.
So that's crazy, though. I have people tell me I'm a 5th generation Mormon. Our people came with the first wagon train, and I'm going, well, I'm a 6th generation Latter-day Saint. We joined the church in 1873, so that's been our legacy from here on out. And I would say most of our tribe, 580 members, I'd say 500 of them are probably still active in the church.
Wow.
One thing about the Shoshones and Native Americans in general, once they joined the church, they were very faithful. They donated more than 2,000 hours to the building of the Logan Temple. And the church let them put their teepees up on the temple grounds the day of the dedication. And they stayed there all week.
Oh, wow.
And so they were very faithful members and still continue today to be faithful. So quite a legacy I've been born into and have to keep going for my kids and grandkids.
Do we know how many people survived the massacre?
Well, I talked earlier about the dream of Tindup. There were about 50 people that left with Tindup. We had other of our tribal members that weren't wintering here that were out in Box Elder County, out by Promontory, was a wintering ground too. But we think just north of 100 survived here, and then 50 left with Tindup, and then there were probably 30 to 50 that were wintering out in Providence, out in Promontory. So
Okay.
if you add all those up, it almost gets to 200 that actually lived past the massacre date.
Terrible. Well, anything else we're missing here?
No, you can barely see the stream rising down there. I don't know. You'll see some smoke coming up from the river. Well, it's steam. But if it's cold here, it's really a big cloud.
So is the Bear River kind of a hot river?
Yes. Well, you go down it and jump in anywhere, it's not. But right there,
At that spot.
and there's
it's
other
kind of a hot spring.
places along the river that are really active with geothermal.
Because there's a lot of hot springs. I know Lava Hot Springs is the big famous place.
Well, and just up here is Maple Grove's hot spring, maybe another 15 miles north here.
Uh-huh.
That was an old hot spring right on the Bear River that was developed into a hot spring that you can go to. And it's under no ownership now, but they've really done a good job of restoring those. So you can go get in about 10 different pools with 10 different temperatures. It's not as nice and developed as lava, but it's almost in the same corridor as lava. We're not very far from lava here today.
Okay.
So we'll drive by some hot springs on our way out. We'll go a different way and I'll show you some hot spring.
Okay.
And it's real similar to the ones that are down there. D News did a big article on this and got me standing. It's early in the morning and it's a lot colder, but the steam is really unbelievable.
Yeah, I bet.
I think there's even snow on the ground. So.
Yeah. So these are just everywhere.
Oh yeah, all along that river. And this one isn't as hot, but the one up there, 186 degrees. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with author Darren Parry. He's the author of the Bear River Massacre. And so, just as a reminder, if you'd like to donate, go to boaogoi.org and you can send in a donation there, boaogoi.org. They're still trying to raise more than $5 million, and so please donate there. Also, you can go to the Northwest. You can write a check to the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. The address is 707 North Main Street, Brigham City, Utah 84302. So, please help donate. I know they'd love to break ground in 2021, and hopefully they can get enough money to help with that amazing center that's going to be there. So, they're actually going to have a ceremony here today. And it'll be recorded on YouTube, so I'll try to post that on my Facebook page. In our next conversation, we're going to jump to the modern day, and we're going to talk about why the Indian headdress is a sacred object in Shoshone culture, and why they shouldn't be used as sports mascots.
And I said to somebody the other day, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I said, it'd be like if you're, the bountiful Mormons, and then somebody wearing temple clothes out there at halftime to get the fans excited, because what the headdress is to a Native American is sacred, and it's as sacred as temple clothing is to a Mormon, a faithful Latter-day Saint. And so you need to understand the sacredness of that headdress, and if you did, you wouldn't wear it, and you wouldn't wear it in the way you did.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruptions. If you'd like to see the whole video, that's just $8 a month, and you can sign up either at youtube.com/gospeltangents or on our website at gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button. Or you can go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and I'll just need to make sure that we're Facebook friends, and I'll add you to our insiders group, and you can see the entire interview uncut. If you'd like to get PDF transcripts of our interviews, those are just $10 a month. And for just $15 a month, I will send you paperback versions of our transcripts as soon as they come out. Or, of course, you can buy them on Amazon as well. Go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all of our transcripts there. Don't forget to sign up for our updates at Facebook.com/gospeltangents. Of course, you can follow us at Gospel Tangents on Twitter. To hear our interviews updated to your podcast player, go to tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and make sure you give us a 5-star review. And of course, you should show your support for Gospel Tangents with one of these cool t-shirts like this green one, or light blue, sport gray, royal blue, purple, of course black, beautiful gold, and of course Utah red. I've probably left out some colors, but if you want to see more, go to gospeltangents.com/shop and you can get one of these. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.